One of the most interesting things about the new story arc is how drastically different Project Stigma turned out to be from what people expected. To be fair, Project Stigma was always a topic about which we didn't know much, but from the little that we knew, people thought that they kinda had a rough idea about the project. Well, apparently not. This turned out to be much more complicated than anyone expected. It's like HoYoverse took the human instrumentality project from Evangelion and Infinite Tsukuyomi from Naruto, mixed them together and came up with something much more convoluted. I know, Project Stigma is confusing, but if you dig really deep, and by that I mean really deep, it makes a lot of sense when you consider the nature of the Honkai and what kind of story this is. So, to all the confused captains gathered here, welcome. Today we're explaining Project Stigma Balls. Okay, before you click off the video, I had to do it. I'm a weak man, what can I say? I promise you, that was the first and the last time. Now, let's dive into Project Stigma Balls.
そう、私たちは人類とは何か再定義する。
One of the easiest ways to understand Project Stigma is to understand Mobius. I was always fascinated by this line when ER was first introduced. Then, after playing it and getting to know Mobius as a character, it started to make more sense. It is said during ER that each flame chaser has its own idea about what fighting the Honkai means, but at the end of the day, they all want the same thing, a world without Honkai. Among all the flame chasers, Mobius was one who challenged the Honkai on a philosophical level. What is human civilization? It is you, me, all of us? No, it's the sum of all the human interactions, ideas and culture passed down through history. Humanity is not you, not me, but everything that we all pass down through our existence. So, when Mobius said that we need to redefine civilization, she basically proposed to find a way to let the idea of civilization exist without humans. Thus, she came up with the prototype for what we call Project Stigma. Project Stigma is one of the 4 projects developed by Moth in an attempt to defeat the Honkai in the new era, alongside Project Arc, Valuka, and Ember. But, as we recently learned, Stigma was the only project which had a real chance at doing so. Unfortunately, it's also the worst project from a human thinking perspective, because it literally requires for all humans to die. At the request of Dr. May, Mobius redesigned the project at least 15 times. Initially, the project was supposed to awaken the stigma genes inside every human on Earth, but because very few people had the necessary Honkai resistance to withstand the power of a stigma, only less than 1% of the human population could awaken it. In the current era, we see Jackal experimenting with this version of the project during chapters 13 and 14. Of course, in the end, World Serpent deemed the original version impractical and went with the more refined version that we see in-game today. Interestingly enough, in the recent chapters, we can see that Project Stigma was way more important for Moth than we thought. I always believed that it was more of a fail-safe plan in case they lose the battle against the Herscher of Finality, but the recent chapters implied quite otherwise. It seems to me that the Moth never really thought that they could stop the Herscher of Finality, and even the fight on the moon was to prepare for Project Stigma in the new era. From the very beginning, their plan for defeating the Honkai was never going to be realized in their era. Pardo literally died because she opened the door to let them hack the finality, while the others tried to stall the Herscher. It was never about winning for them, which changes a lot my perspective of Kevin and his actions in the current era. I always saw him as a man who lost the battle against the Honkai and tried to use the new era to set things right. But no, he never lost the fight. He was fighting all this time, and Project Stigma is not a fail-safe plan. Project Stigma is the plan. I feel like people got the wrong impression of Kevin. He isn't just a heartless monster that wants to defeat the Honkai at any cost, but he does what he does because he has no other choice. He doesn't like Project Stigma either, that's why he tries to make the Herrschers and the people of the new era understand what Honkai is. He even fought Kiana May and Bronya using the authority of finality to let them experience it. But at the same time, he lacks faith in the current era. He's not going to sit around and gamble on a possibility like Alicia did. Until someone comes up with a better plan, he will not stop. In the second key manga, Kevin tried to implement the project 1500 years ago, but Sue stopped him. As Sue was about to seal both himself and Kevin in the Sea of Quanta, Kevin threw him out and told him to continue Project Valuka. This scene shows very well what kind of person is Kevin. He wanted to believe in Sue and the other projects, but at the same time, he knew that it was pointless. He's a very complex character, but I get why people might miss that. His complexity comes from an inner struggle. He is not like Ado, who likes to put himself out there and mess with everyone. Kevin is quieter, more introspect, but nonetheless a very well realized character. Just like May said, he's not an enemy but a rival. To understand the current version of Project Stigma, we need to understand what kind of being is Hare. Before continuing, I highly recommend you to watch my other video about Stigmata, since it can help you obtain a much easier understanding of the concept. If not, that's okay, I still try to explain it in an understandable manner. Hare is a form, a new species of humans brought forth by Project Stigma. In very simple terms, forms are ideas that come from the human consciousness that are projected into reality by Project Stigma through Stigma spaces. Basically, Project Stigma turns human ideas into something similar to a stigma and projects them back as being similar to Hare. Red Cele and the Wheel of the Kaslana Stigma are also forms. The humanoid creatures that attacked Kiana and the rest inside the strange imaginary space from chapter 33 were seeds of ideas. Artificial life forms temporarily staying in an incomplete state due to Project Stigma not being complete. They encapsulate a human idea and will become the new humans when Project Stigma is done. Hare is the crystallization of the Shariak Stigma. She was born after the second eruption when Cecilia Stigma lost its balance due to her using the power of the holy blood to the extreme. Because Cecilia interacted with the Herscher of the Void at the same time, some anomalies happened in imaginary space and made her stigma crystallize into an unstable form. I will explain Hare and her past in another video because she's a lot more complex than that, but what's important about her is her power called dream catching that allows Hare to trap humans into dreams. Please note that when they say dreams in game, they refer to something similar to stigma spaces. Now that we know the origins of Project Stigma, let's talk about the project itself. What is Project Stigma? Well, the project itself does a lot of things that are explained using a lot of different analogies in the game. In essence, Hare's ability put all the people on Earth inside dreams. In their dreams, people live an ideal version of their lives, while Project Stigma takes away their ideas and transforms them into forms. Note that in the context of Project Stigma, the words idea and narrative are used very loosely to encapsulate a lot of meanings. So, let's explain them. All forms of narratives first exist in imagination before being made into reality. A fictional story is a narrative. Programming code is also a narrative for machines. An engineering blueprint is a narrative on how to build. Basically, any thought, idea or concept that comes from the human imagination is a narrative. So Project Stigma comes in and says, if humans are creatures of ideas, why is reality necessary? Why not just exist purely as ideas, fiction, and dreams? Forms are a new species that can exist as narratives. Project Stigma wants to take humanity's narratives and transcend them into imaginary concepts that can exist and function on their own. Like getting rid of the writer and giving the story the ability to continue on its own. Because forms are living ideas, they are imaginary creatures in nature that carry on the narratives of human civilization. From the perspective of Project Stigma, the individual is not important, but what the individual represents is what truly matters. In short, the idea of you is more important than you. Vilvi puts it very well in chapter 31EX when she says the following.
つまり誰がビルビーになったとしてもビルビーの才能こそがこの世界で最も大事なものってこと？
What a person can do and pass down is more important than the person itself. You will eventually die, but your narratives will survive and shape civilization down the line in their unique way. Project Stigma takes those ideas and transcribes them into forms that can exist on their own. Let's do a small imagination exercise. Close your eyes and imagine a subscribe button. Now, press it. It turned gray, right? Now open your eyes and do the same with the subscribe button below this video. Oh, and you can also leave a thumbs up if you're there. Now, the idea of you subscribing came into your mind first, and after that you acted in reality and created the narrative of subscribing to Homu Labs. Pretty cool, right? But you may ask, Homu, how does this stop the Honkai? Well, to explain this, we'll have to talk about the true nature of the Honkai. Prometheus says that reality binds fiction. Let's say that I like to play video games, right? The first thing that you do when you hear that is to associate me with the idea of a loser, I mean gamer. From your perspective, I represent an abstract idea of a gamer in reality. In that moment, the idea of gamer gets a form and is no longer abstract or free, it becomes reality through me. Now, think of Honkai as an abstract idea that exists on its own. Honkai is basically an imaginary entity not bound by reality that loves to be the protagonist of its own story. It's a form of narrative that hates reality because it's like a cage for it. Ado says it best in chapter 27.
おそらく律者こそが最終的な自由。我々の文明はむしろ崩壊を禁錮し、歪みを生む枷なのかもしれない。
Civilization is a cage that imprisons the Honkai. Because of this, Honkai, which is basically fiction, cannot accept reality and wages war against it. Basically, Honkai is an imaginary force that, by nature, destroys reality. Everything that is real, it's an enemy. It's not something that uses emotions or things, and it's definitely not an entity that wants to embrace us in the way that most of you think. The whole Honkai wants to embrace us is a misinterpreted analogy that I will explain in my next video. Thus, Project Stigma aims to transform life into an imaginary existence that is independent from reality, just like the Honkai, and that will be able to peacefully coexist with it. That is why Schrödinger calls Project Stigma a web that can absorb the power of finality. It creates a web of ideas to stop the spreading of finality. Herrschers and Stigma Awakened are in an opposing relationship with each other. Herrschers rip the space apart and create imaginary singularities through which even more Honkai seeps into reality. Stigmata can balance that process by being imaginary in nature and being able to absorb Honkai energy. As we saw in the Strange Space from chapter 33, because both Herrschers and Stigma Awakened were present, the space around them has stabilized and continued to expand indefinitely, trapping them inside. But as soon as they got separated, the space was no longer stable and it could be ripped apart by the Herrschers to get out. Meanwhile, the dreams that trapped the real humans will slowly fuse into a metaphysical being that encapsulates humanity's collective unconsciousness, which Grey Serpent calls Adam Ruhani, meaning spiritual Adam. Dr. May calls the Honkai the result of a civilization becoming one will. So, in another sense, Project Stigma facilitates the evolution of the human civilization into a godlike being similar to the Honkai. Hare refers to humanity as the childhood of civilization, implying that both Finality and Project Stigma tries to force the evolution of humanity through different means. While Honkai wants to destroy humanity in the process, Project Stigma wants to preserve the idea of humanity through forms. I really hope that this video helped you understand Project Stigma and Kevin. If you have any other things from chapters 32 and 33 that you did not understand and you'd like to see a video about it, leave a comment down below. Take care and I'll see you next time.